gazdasági kormányzás folytatódott, vagy mondjuk Bokros Lajos politikája, mint pénzügyminiszter, jó, mondjuk ő beült a Kaczynszki-féle pártszövetségbe, tehát az ott tényleg egy kicsit kirívó, hogy mit csinált ő a Kaczynszki-féle pártszövetségbe, de ezt tegyük most félre, ez már csak, ez tényleg egy ilyen igen, az Európai Parlamentben ugyanabban a frakcióval ült be, ahova a Kaczynszkék, ez már csak egy couleur lokál, de hogyha ezt félrerakjuk, alapvetően ettől eltekintve gyönyörűen beleilleszthető a magyar baloldalnak a története a liberális, szociális, európai vagy globális sztoriba. És azt gondolom, hogy a Fidesz is egyébként, ez már egy teljesen másik konferenciának lenne a témája természetesen, de szerintem a Fidesz nagyon könnyen értelmezhető az amerikai republikánus párt és valami fajta távol-keleti fejlesztő államnak a kombinációja. Két konzervatív hagyományt ötvöz, a republikánusokét és egy távol-keleti fejlesztő államot, nem teljesen ebben az arányban, de szerintem gyönyörűen beleilleszthető Magyarország. Sokszor azt gondoljuk, hogy mi valami egészen különlegesek vagyunk, de szerintem sokkal jobban belesimulunk a világ tendenciákba, mint ahogy azt gondolnánk. Köszönöm.
Köszönöm szépen. Szívesen nyitnék egy újabb panelt arról, hogy vajon az állam mérete, vagy a szabályozottság, mondjuk egy gazdaság szabályozottságának a mérete az, ami mondjuk a korrupciót befolyásolja, mert itt mondjuk azért én vitatkoznék ezekkel a szerzőkkel, hogy az állam méret ez nem ma, máskor. Igen. Előtte viszont szeretném megadni a zárszóra a lehetőséget Peter Ucheinnek. I would like to ask you to come for closing remarks. Ő a Nemzetközi Republikánus Intézet európai programjának korábbi programfelelőse volt is. The floor is yours for 15 minutes sharp, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening to everybody. I would like to, first of all, I would like to thank two organizers of the conference, namely György Schöffling, for inviting me. I am not going to give an intellectual summary of the conference because I don't have this intellectual capacity to do it, but hopefully I will provide a good concluding remarks. So, farewell to liberalism, demise of liberalism, it's my favorite topic. I'm very fond of this topic. It was actually during my first intellectual enterprise in political science many years ago. As a very young researcher, I studied party politics in interbellum Czechoslovakia in 1920s and 1930s. As you can imagine, you cannot avoid the topic of the demise of liberal order if you are studying mass democracy in a country which has borders on the north with Poland under Pilsudski, with Weimar, Germany, with Austria under Dollfuss, and in the south with Hungary under Gyula Gombos and Miklos Horthy. So since then I have become very fond of the topic, and I have read a lot of theories about the demise of liberalism and about the many deaths of liberalism foretold. And I have developed a certain exercise over time. You know, when I see the criticism of liberalism, I always ask myself whether the critics really criticizes liberalism. And if I conclude that yes, he or she criticizes liberalism, then I'm interested whether he or she criticizes it as an ideology, as a political movement, as the lifestyle strategy, or something else. Sometimes people think they criticize liberalism, but what they have in mind is actually capitalism, or libertinism, or some other conceptions and misconceptions of liberalism. There are other cases where people believe that they are having critical view of liberalism, but in reality they criticize liberal democracy. They criticize the fact of the marriage of liberalism and democracy, and the persuasion that this is a precious thing which should be retained. In some other cases, people tend to think they criticize, or they tend to pretend they criticize democracy, but actually in guise they criticize something else. Liberalism, but they criticize something else. Criticism of liberalism is just a disguise for refutation of democracy, for refutation of the idea that popular sovereignty is the source or legitimizing source of power in a democratic society. And György Schöffling presented very nicely the series of his provocations, which actually are a reflection of a broader trend, which is not only in this country but in the whole Europe region, are growing in incidence and in echo, in resonance. These arguments claim, among other things, that liberalism, and especially liberal democracy, is enjoying some kind of undeserved monopoly, that it should be perhaps put on a par with other forms of democracy, like social democracy, Christian democracy, or perhaps also non-liberal democracy. In this way of reasoning, there is less pronounced suggestion that in contemporary democracies, the balance between liberalism and democracy has been tipped towards the former, towards the liberalism, at the expense of democracy, at the expense of popular sovereignty, which is almost incapacitated. And Mr. Schöpflin presented those arguments very nicely, and I would like to add the recent interview of the Prime Minister of this country to the European edition of Politico, in which he says that liberalism in Europe now concentrates not on freedom but on political correctness. It became a sclerotic ideology, dogmatic, may I say. The liberals are enemies of freedom. So this is a broader trend which says that once liberalism was okay, it was about defending freedom, about tolerance, etc., etc. Now liberalism is about something different, and liberalism is a problem rather than something on which we should rely. Well, let me offer my take on this and suggest that perhaps we could propose other explanation of troubles with liberalism if we take into account that the so-called troubles of liberalism may be a mixture of two things. As a fact of the matter, elitism of the most current forms of liberal democracy really existing in reality. They indeed are elitist. The other thing is possible misunderstanding what liberalism is today and what we mean by it when we talk about it. And my argument is going to be based on two claims. Well, on one claim that liberalism in the last 150 years underwent two parallel processes. First one, it broke down into more liberalisms. So there is not anymore a liberalism, there are only liberalisms. Any group which claims to represent liberalism is simply wrong. Michael Frieden, whom I consider the most distinguished researcher or student of liberalism these days, just published a few weeks ago a very short introduction to liberalism in the famous Oxford University Press edition, where he says this in very, in no uncertain terms. There is no liberalism, there are only liberalisms. So the other process which I would like to point out is that liberalism has become something else than ideology. I mean, it used to be ideology, but it has become something which we could call meta-ideology in terms of Andrew Haywood, or public philosophy, as Paul Shoemaker would probably put it. So some public philosophy as a result of the dialogue between spokespersons of different ideologies on the pluralist platform is something which defines parameters of the political debate within contemporary mainstream, but also between the mainstream and challengers. So this liberal meta-ideology includes ideological elements, but also some consensus on political culture and unconditional respect for pluralism. In other words, if you are, the practical implication is that if we today speak of liberalism, then the meaning of the word liberalism has become dramatically contingent upon the context in which it is used. So if you are a liberal democrat today, you subscribe to the persuasion that the marriage of liberalism and democracy that has taken place in the 20th century is a normatively good and preferred situation, and regardless of the actual balance of powers between the two, democracy and liberalism, this is worth of cherishing, preserving, and defending. If you are a liberal democrat, regardless of the ideological provenance, you can be socialist, liberal, conservative, Christian democrats, and regardless of this opinion about the ideal balance, you defend the fact of marriage. I couldn't find a better word than marriage. So all parties in a liberal meta family include persons and ideas which have some troubles with both democracy and liberalism. Certainly conservatives historically have troubles with both democracy and liberalism. Even contemporary conservatives include persons and ideas which have certain tensions. Socialists originate as a radical challengers to classical liberalism. Christian Democrats, very much the same. So when these various sorry, I forgot what I wanted to say. Okay, so if we talk about liberalism, we basically have to specify which liberalism we mean, and that will be also the major criticism of, I'm very much afraid of the provocations of George Chaplin if he continues to publicize these provocations. Probably the main accusation will be that you have created a spitting image of liberalism, that you distilled from various existing realities of liberal democratic mainstream a spitting image of liberalism in order to prove that something is wrong with contemporary liberalism, and that actually what you are talking about it's not the actual liberalism, it's a construct which you created for a certain political purpose. But that's a danger which every person who does not have very much respect for the dogmas of the political mainstream faces. So I would like to conclude my conclusions by giving my take on the main question, one of the main questions. So, does liberalism have alternatives in contemporary politics? You know, as an ideology, as a political ideology, or as a political movement, yes, plenty of them. But as a public philosophy or meta-ideology, of which I was talking about previously, I cannot imagine alternative. Certainly, I cannot imagine alternative which would not be nasty, and which we would prefer over the way of life we have now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Köszönjük szépen, és most professzor urat megkérném, hogy zárja le a konferenciát.
Well, I won't respond directly to Peter Ucen, but we'll discuss this over time. Yes, of course I constructed something, but then I am a social constructivist, so that's only to be expected. I think this is a good debate. We'll continue with it, I trust, many times, perhaps in Bratislava. Who knows? Tehát mindenkinek szeretném megköszönni jelenlétét, előadóknak, résztvevőknek, kérdésfeltevőknek, azoknak is, akik csak itt ültek, és remélem, hogy élvezték a ma délutánt. Én személy szerint nagyon sokat tanultam, és még szeretném külön megköszönni a szinkrontolmácsoknak, illetve a szervezőknek, akik nélkül ez nem történt volna meg. És hogyha érzékszerveim nem csalnak, minthogyha valami történne arra felé, ami azt arra mutat, hogy lesz valami ennivaló és innivaló, és mindenki szeretettel várunk. Ági?
Nagyon szépen köszönjük a figyelmet, és engedjék meg, hogy még egy kedves kötelezettségemnek tegyek eleget. Ma van egy, vagy akár több születésnaposunk is. Ez meglepetés valószínűleg. Boldog születésnapot kívánunk, professzor úr! És ha nem tévedünk, akkor tényleg van egy meglepetés, ugyanis Péter Ucsennek is ma van a születésnapja. Jól tudjuk? Do you have your birthday today?
No.
No? Sorry, that's then I am mistaken, but anyway, kocincsunk akkor a professzor úr tiszteletére. Boldog születésnapot kívánunk, és várunk mindenkit szeretettel a büfénél.
Köszönöm szépen.